Ashon Bell hadn't slept. Not really. His body had rested, yes, stretched out across the narrow mattress in the corner of his small bedroom. But his mind had raced all night, loops of memories, fears, what-ifs, and worst-case scenarios. Dawn broke through his thin blinds like an uninvited witness. The glow settled on his dark skin and the frayed edge of a college application sitting untouched on his desk. Today wasn't about the future. It was about survival. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. At 17, Ashon carried himself with a maturity far beyond his years. Not by choice, but by necessity. His world was a chessboard, and one wrong move could mean ruin. He looked in the cracked mirror above his dresser. His reflection stared back, eyes heavy, jaw clenched, tie slightly off-center. He adjusted it, though he knew it wouldn't matter to the judge. The town of Grayson Falls wore its racism like a second skin, invisible to those who benefited, suffocating to those who didn't. Confederate flags didn't just fly here. They were stitched into lawn chairs, stamped on bumper stickers, painted across store windows. The local high school still bore the name of a Confederate general, and the football team's mascot was a caricature that made black students sink lower in their seats during pep rallies. The only advanced placement courses were silently reserved for white students. No policy, just practice. And the police, they were everywhere, except when you needed them. Ashon's charge: obstruction of justice. The truth? He had refused to unlock his phone without a warrant during a stop and frisk, an act of knowing his rights that Officer Travis Keene interpreted as defiance. The irony was vicious: a teenager trying to follow the law, arrested by the very man paid to uphold it. He grabbed his backpack, worn but neat, and zipped it slowly, listening to the satisfying click of the metal teeth coming together. Inside it was more than notebooks. Inside was something he had spent weeks organizing, backing up, preparing. His fingers brushed it briefly, a reminder that he wasn't walking into the courthouse defenseless. Still, his palms sweated. Downstairs, his mother, Simone, sat at the kitchen table with a steaming mug she hadn't sipped. Her eyes lifted as he entered. No words, just a long look, the kind that held prayers, history, and helpless rage. "You remember what I said?" she asked, her voice cracking. Ashon nodded. "Yes, ma'am," calm, clear. "Don't let him pull me out my name." Simone stood and adjusted the collar of his shirt, her hands lingering for a moment too long, as if memorizing his face. "They see what they want. You show them who you are anyway." Outside, the air was heavy with summer humidity, the kind that stuck to the lungs. Ashon and Simone walked the 5 blocks to the courthouse in silence, passing shuttered black-owned shops replaced by liquor stores and pawn shops. A mural of Martin Luther King Jr. had been defaced months ago, a spray-painted liar scrawled across his face. No one had bothered to clean it. As they neared the courthouse, Ashon spotted Keene leaning against his patrol car, arms crossed, sunglasses on despite the cloudy sky. The officer's presence wasn't procedural, it was personal. He gave Ashon a tight-lipped smirk, the kind that said, "I already won." Keene was infamous in Grayson Falls. He wasn't loud. He was calculated. He'd learned early that bruises faded, but records didn't. He didn't beat you, he boxed you in. Curfews, charges, intimidation. Black boys feared him. White parents trusted him. He was the town's protector, from who no one ever quite said out loud. Ashon kept his head high, but inside, his stomach twisted. Keene's stare didn't pierce him. It infected him, made him second-guess every step. As they entered the courthouse, metal detectors loomed like gatekeepers. The security guard barely glanced at the older white man ahead of them, but stopped Ashon with a grunt. "Empty the bag." Ashon complied, slow, deliberate. Not a twitch of attitude. He removed his phone, his charger, a bottle of water, and the manila folder. The guard poked around with a gloved hand, eyes flicking up with mild irritation, then waved him through. Inside, the hallways smelled of polish and dust. Simone gave Ashon's hand a gentle squeeze before they parted. She would sit in the gallery. He would stand alone. In the waiting room outside the courtroom, Ashon sat and breathed. Deep, even breaths. He looked around. 3 white teenagers chatted easily with their lawyer across the room. One laughed. They were here for vandalism. Ashon was here for protecting his privacy. A door creaked open. The public defender appeared. Mid-30s, distracted, folders stacked under one arm. "Ashon Bell?" He stood. "Yes, sir." "Let's talk." They moved into a side room, sterile and windowless. The lawyer flipped through papers with sighs that said he'd rather be anywhere else. "Obstruction. Refusal to comply. Officer Keene says you were uncooperative, possibly aggressive. Any witnesses?" "No, sir," Ashon said, steady. The lawyer finally looked up. Did you do what they're saying? Ashon didn't flinch. No, I told him I wouldn't unlock my phone without a warrant, that's all. The lawyer gave a weary nod, more bureaucratic than empathetic. All right, it's your word against his. Judges around here, well, you know. Ashon reached into his backpack slowly. His fingers wrapped around the drive. He pulled it out and held it out. This might help. The lawyer frowned. What's this? Ashon's voice didn't waver. Footage, from my body cam. It shows everything, the stop, the search, what really happened. The lawyer stared for a long moment, then took the drive and inserted it into his laptop. As the video began to load, his expression changed, from disinterest to alertness, then shock. You filmed this? Ashon nodded. Yes, and there's more. The lawyer looked at him with a new weight behind his eyes. Not disbelief, respect. Outside the room, the bailiff announced that court would begin in 5 minutes. The hallway grew tense, footsteps echoing. Simone stood, spine stiff, as she watched the doors open. Ashon rose, slid his backpack over one shoulder, and adjusted his collar again. He turned to the lawyer. I need them to see the truth, all of it. As the courtroom filled and the judge entered, Ashon moved toward the defense table. He sat, heart thudding but gaze steady. The judge adjusted his glasses, expression unreadable. Officer Keene entered confidently, smirking, nodding at the court clerk. Ashon waited until the judge asked for the defense to present its opening argument. Then, with quiet deliberation, Ashon unzipped his backpack once more, but not for the flash drive. No. His fingers gripped something else entirely. Something unexpected. Something that wasn't part of any legal plan but would change everything. The courtroom was less a place of law than a stage set for performance, where power flexed in silence and justice bowed to tradition. Its walls were lined with varnished wood that gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, each bench an unforgiving slab that forced you to sit up straight, to shrink your voice. The air was cold, not in temperature but in temperament. It stilled around black skin like an invisible verdict already passed. Ashon Bell stood at the defense table, flanked by a lawyer who had only just learned his name, and a judge who hadn't looked at him once. Behind him, rows of strangers shifted in stiff pews. Most were white, business owners, police spouses, retirees who'd come out of curiosity or quiet allegiance to Officer Keene. A few black faces dotted the crowd, tight-lipped and guarded, their presence less support than protest. At the back, Simone Bell sat rigid, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. The judge, Warren M. Tilson, bore the face of someone long past caring. His robe looked ironed by habit, his glasses smudged by indifference. He was a man who had seen hundreds of cases, and if asked later, would say he remembered Ashon's only vaguely. One of those disrespectful kids, he might say, sipping his coffee, forgetting he'd almost ruined a life. His reputation preceded him. Judge Tilson hadn't overtly ruled against black defendants. He simply followed protocol so mechanically, so coldly, that the scales of justice tilted on their own. His dismissals were curt, his sympathy reserved. In a town like Grayson Falls, that kind of neutrality wasn't harmless. It was lethal. Across the room, Officer Travis Keene sat with legs stretched out, back against the chair like a man bored by the inconvenience of accountability. He wore his uniform like a shield, the shine on his badge matching the smugness in his eyes. Every once in a while, he shot Ashon a look, not confrontational, not aggressive, just the kind that said, "You're wasting everyone's time, boy." Ashon didn't return the look. He couldn't. His stomach had coiled into knots, but his face remained unreadable. He'd practiced that look in the mirror for years, the mask you wear when the world expects your guilt. The court clerk stood and began reading the charges. Ashon Bell, age 17, charged with obstruction of justice, resisting a lawful search, and failure to comply with a peace officer. Each word dropped like a stone, none of them true. The judge raised his eyes just enough to acknowledge the proceedings. "State your plea," he said, his voice thin.
"Not guilty," Ashon said, his voice even but firm.
"Prosecution," the judge gestured lazily. "You may proceed." The district attorney was young, eager, and disturbingly confident. He began with flair, describing Keene as a decorated officer, a pillar of the community, someone who'd bravely handled a potentially volatile situation involving a non-compliant suspect. He spoke of Ashon like a statistic. "We must consider the rise in confrontations with youth who believe they're above the law. This isn't about race, it's about respect for authority." Ashon's lawyer objected to the phrasing, but the judge waved him off. And so it began. As Keene took the stand, he adjusted his posture and softened his voice. He recounted how he had spotted Ashon loitering near a closed auto shop, how he had approached cautiously and was met with hostility. He claimed Ashon refused to answer questions, refused to produce ID, and acted erratic. He described fear of being ambushed, of being attacked. There was no body cam footage. Keen's had malfunctioned, just his word against Ashon's. Then the prosecutor asked, "Officer, were you afraid for your safety?" Keen nodded solemnly. "Yes. In today's climate, you never know what someone's carrying." He had a backpack. He was fidgeting. "My training told me this could escalate." Ashon sat frozen. The lies weren't new, but hearing them delivered so calmly, so professionally, made his chest ache. He turned slightly to glance at his mother. Her lips were pressed tight, her eyes locked on Keen with a quiet fury that could crack stone. The defense lawyer stood, finally. "Officer Keen, was the suspect armed?" "No." "Did he threaten you?" "No." "Did he shout? Swear?" "No." "So he didn't attack you?" "No." The lawyer paused. "Yet you arrested him." "He obstructed an investigation," Keen said coolly. "He refused to unlock his phone. We have policies, protocols." Ashon clenched his hands beneath the table. No one in that courtroom cared about what had actually happened. They only cared that he hadn't submitted. The judge shifted in his seat, glancing at the clock. "We're wasting time," he said. "Unless the defense has something substantive, I'm prepared to make a ruling." Ashon's lawyer stood, hesitant, unsure if this was the moment. He turned to Ashon, who met his eyes and gave a single nod. From beneath the table, Ashon reached into his backpack. Not for the paper notes, not for the folders. He pulled out a small black USB drive, compact, ordinary, but it hummed with the weight of truth. He held it out without a word. The lawyer took it, surprised. "What is this?" "Video," Ashon said softly, "of the stop, my body cam. It's all there." The judge leaned forward. "You recorded the incident?" Ashon didn't blink. "Yes, sir, every second." The courtroom shifted. Whispers. Someone scoffed. Another murmured. "He recorded the cop?" Keen's smile faltered, just a little. The lawyer moved quickly, inserting the drive into his laptop, projecting the footage onto the monitor. The screen flickered. A streetlight, a sidewalk, then Ashon's voice. "Am I being detained?" Keen's voice followed, sharper. "You fit a description." "For walking? You want to play smart, son?" The courtroom hushed as the full weight of the video unfurled, uncut, unedited. Keen escalating, demanding access to Ashon's phone, threatening arrest. Ashon standing firm, frightened but calm, asking for a warrant. The footage ended with Keen cuffing him against a wall, muttering, "One more smartass off the street." The judge's face hardened, unreadable. The prosecutor scrambled, whispering frantically to his assistant. Keen sat frozen, jaw tight. The judge cleared his throat. "We'll take a recess to review this further." But Ashon wasn't finished. Still seated, still calm, he leaned into his lawyer and whispered something. The lawyer looked startled. "There's more?" Ashon nodded. That drive was just the beginning. It had started like any other late-night warm air, the buzz of cicadas and streetlights flickering dimly in a neighborhood too poor for timely maintenance. Ashon Bell walked with purpose, backpack slung over one shoulder, hoodie zipped halfway, his head low but his spirit grounded. He had just finished tutoring Malik, a freshman from his school, who struggled in algebra but trusted Ashon more than the teachers. It was part of the plan: keep his grades sharp, stay active in the community, and build the kind of resume no one could ignore, not even the ones who already had. He kept to the sidewalks, headphones looped around his neck but silent, alert. In Grayson Falls, it wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. The unspoken curfew for black boys wasn't listed anywhere, but it lived in the collective memory of every mother on Ashon's block. Up ahead, the road split beneath a set of blinking traffic lights. One way led to the local playground, abandoned at this hour, except for littered beer cans and faded chalk drawings. The other, his street. He turned left. That's when he heard the slow hum of tires crawling over asphalt. He didn't look back immediately. He didn't have to. The sound was too familiar. The drag of a patrol car. The thick breath of suspicion leaking from the engine. It slowed just behind him. Lights off, windows up, but present. He could feel it. The gaze, the weight of it. He adjusted his backpack strap, kept walking. Then, the inevitable.
"Hey!"
The voice cut through the night like a blade. Ashon turned, slow, respectful, already rehearsing every word he'd need to say. A patrol car had pulled alongside him, driver's side window down just enough for the voice to slip out. Officer Keene leaned slightly toward the window. He didn't smile. He didn't greet. He just studied Ashon like a puzzle he didn't want to solve. "What are you doing out here?" Ashon answered clearly, calmly. "Walking home, sir. Just left a friend's place. Tutoring." "At this hour?"
Yes, sir.
"You live around here?" "Yes, sir. About 4 blocks that way." Keene tilted his head, scanning Ashon's face like he'd seen it before, and he had. Twice. Once when Ashon spoke at the school board meeting about equity. Another when Ashon refused to sign a citation for jaywalking and asked for a supervisor. Keene hadn't forgotten. "You look nervous," Keene said flatly. Ashon swallowed hard. "I'm just trying to get home, sir." "You got ID?" "Yes, sir." "Let me see it." Ashon slowly reached for his wallet, held it up, then handed it through the window. Keene studied it for a long beat, then looked up. "What's in the bag?" "School stuff, laptop, homework." "Mind if I check?" Ashon hesitated. "I'd prefer not unless there's a warrant. I haven't done anything wrong." There it was, the shift. Keene's face tightened. Not rage, insult. "You refusing a lawful request." "I'm just asserting my rights, sir." Keene opened his door. Ashon took a step back. The door slammed shut behind him as Keene approached, his boots hitting pavement with a rhythm meant to intimidate. He stood close, too close, the edge of his badge glinting under the streetlight. Ashon looked ahead, not meeting his eyes. "You think you're smarter than me?" "No, sir. I'm just—" "Because you read something in a book or on your little phone?" Ashon's voice cracked slightly, despite his effort. "I'm not trying to cause a problem." "But you are a problem, aren't you?" Keene hissed. "Out here after curfew, refusing orders. This neighborhood don't need kids like you stirring up mess." Ashon glanced down. That's when Keene stepped forward and yanked the backpack from his shoulder. No warning. "Hey, hands where I can see 'em." Ashon complied instantly, but his voice trembled. "You didn't have permission to search my bag." Keene laughed. "I don't need permission from punks who walk like ghosts at midnight." Ashon didn't resist. He didn't move. He just stood there, breathing fast, heart pounding, while Keene rummaged through his things, pulling out books, a laptop, a calculator, and the black zippered pouch that held his body cam. "What's this?" "School supplies," Ashon lied. Keene tossed it onto the hood of the car.
"You're coming with me."
"For what?" "Obstruction, suspicion of trespassing, and you're mouthy." Ashon couldn't believe what he was hearing. His feet felt like concrete. The worst part wasn't the lies, it was how easily they rolled off Keene's tongue. Routine. Scripted.
"You're not even going to tell me what I did."
Keene grabbed him by the arm and spun him around, pressing him against the hood. "You did enough. We'll figure out the rest downtown." And in that moment, with his cheek pressed to hot metal and the sour breath of racism hovering behind him, Ashon knew he was no longer a student, or a brother, or a dreamer. He was a statistic. A black body, made to feel disposable. But what Keene didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that the entire time, nestled in the stitching of Ashon's hoodie, a tiny lens blinked silently. Recording. His older brother Isaiah had gifted it to him after his own run-in with police ended in bruised ribs and a suspended license. "You wear this," Isaiah had said, "because they lie easy and they lie fast." And Ashon had worn it, every day, just in case. Now it had captured everything, every word, every glare, every power-soaked humiliation. Keene's voice, the false charges, the tone, the threat. And as Ashon sat cuffed in the back of the squad car that night, staring at the cracked ceiling, one thought kept him grounded. They thought no one would see what they did in the dark, but the lens didn't blink. Back in the present, the USB was still playing in the courtroom. But as the footage reached the end of the arrest, something flickered. A folder, a new name. Archived Keene. The lawyer frowned and clicked. It wasn't just Ashon's footage. It was others. Multiple files, different dates, same officer, same abuse. Keene hadn't just lied once. He'd built a career on it. The courtroom lights hummed overhead, unblinking and cold, as the screen in front of the gallery paused on the image of Ashon's face, pressed against the hood of a police cruiser, skin slick with sweat and humiliation. The room had gone deathly quiet, not out of respect but disbelief. They had expected a boy exaggerating, maybe lying, maybe another angry teen puffing up false claims against an officer. What they got was video, clean, uninterrupted truth, and it didn't just sting. It tore through the illusion that Keene was anything more than a predator with a badge. Keene sat motionless, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles rippled in his face. The judge leaned back slowly, lips pursed in a thin, unreadable line. The court clerk's fingers hovered over her keyboard, unsure if typing now meant documenting something the court never wanted on record. The defense attorney's voice broke the silence. "Your Honor, there's more." Before the judge could respond, the drive began to play another file. This one time-stamped 8 months earlier. A different teen, different location, same pattern. A quiet, frightened black boy walking home. Keen pulling over. Questions without reason. Arrest without cause. He wore a badge, but it was the silence of the system that made him untouchable. What the courtroom didn't know, what most of Grayson Falls had buried, was that Officer Travis Keene had worn that badge for over a decade. And in that time, he'd accumulated 21 complaints of excessive force, racial profiling, and misconduct. Not a single one had been sustained. The department's internal review board, made up of mostly retired law enforcement and 2 members of the Chamber of Commerce, dismissed every case. They cited lack of evidence, unreliable witnesses, standard procedure. And yet, if you asked the black mothers in the east side of town, they could recite his name like a curse. If you walked into Jefferson High School and asked the black boys in detention how many had been stopped by Keene, most would raise their hands. They'd tell you about the look he gave when the cameras weren't on. The threats whispered just low enough, the subtle elbow, the planted blunt, the quote-unquote confusion. And there was one woman who had never stopped listening to those stories. Tamara Rhodes. Tamara had been a journalist for the Grayson Echo for 6 years, and every one of those years had tested her resolve. She had studied journalism at Howard, graduated with honors, and returned to her hometown thinking she'd be writing the truth that mattered. Instead, her stories about police brutality were buried under coverage about pie festivals and ribbon cuttings, so she started documenting on her own. She remembered the first time she heard about Keene. A 14-year-old boy named Trevon was arrested for disturbing the peace after he asked a white woman at a park if she'd seen his lost bike. Keene wrote the report. The boy spent 2 nights in juvie. Tamara went to the station, asked for the body cam footage. She was told there had been a technical failure. That phrase would haunt her for years. She'd tracked every case since then. Dozens of black boys, none of them taken seriously. Parents too scared to speak out. Teachers too tired to fight. City council meetings where she was ignored, called aggressive, unprofessional. She'd been followed, her tires slashed. Her editor had warned her to back off. But she didn't. Instead, she created a digital archive, anonymized testimonies, photos, timestamps, even maps tracking Keene's patrols. The pattern was undeniable. The stories were identical in tone, different only in date. Tamara had submitted them to the mayor's office, the state attorney, and even the DOJ. Each time the answer was the same: "We are reviewing your inquiry." And now Ashon Bell, a boy she'd never met, had done in 2 minutes what 6 years of journalism had failed to do. Forced a courtroom to watch. Tamara sat quietly in the back of the courtroom now, her laptop open, fingers moving fast. She wasn't there as press. The paper refused to run the story. She was there as witness and warrior. The footage shifted again. This time, a clip from 2 years ago. A shaky cell phone recording, not Ashon's, but another teen's, showed Keene berating a group of black students near a gas station. The voice was unmistakable. "You want to act tough? I'll show you how this ends." "You recording me? That's cute. Let's see how fast that phone breaks when it hits the pavement." The courtroom inhaled as one. Ashon sat still, his hands folded on his lap, his posture straight. But inside he was burning. Not with anger, with clarity. Every second of footage validated what he'd carried alone. He hadn't imagined the tone, the threat, the hatred. It was real. And now they all saw it. The judge finally raised his hand. "We'll call a 10-minute recess while the court reviews this material." Ashon's lawyer turned. "Your Honor, with respect." "I said recess." The gavel struck once, cold and final. The bailiff stood. The room began to stir. Ashon remained seated. So did Keene. But their silence now was different. The judge stepped down from the bench and disappeared into his chambers, but not before whispering something to the clerk. Tamara's eyes narrowed. She leaned forward. She knew what this was. The playbook. They'd stop the leak, seal the files, discredit the evidence, maybe lose the USB and evidence. She pulled out her phone, opened a secure drive, and began uploading everything she could from the feed. Back at the defense table, Ashon's lawyer leaned toward him. "You said there's more." Ashon nodded. "Yeah, a lot more." "Where is it?" Ashon gave a soft, bitter smile. "In the cloud, password protected. And I sent a copy to someone else, just in case they try to bury it." "Who?" Ashon glanced back at the gallery, found Tamara's eyes. She nodded, once, firmly. And that's when the unexpected happened. A uniformed officer entered the courtroom from the side door. Not a bailiff, not part of the courthouse staff. It was Officer Charles Marin, Keene's former patrol partner, a man who had retired quietly just 2 months earlier, without fanfare. He walked past the gallery, past the rows of eyes, and handed a thick sealed envelope to the judge's clerk. Inside it was a sworn affidavit, and 3 damning photographs. As the courtroom emptied during recess, murmurs buzzed like flies around an open wound. What had just unfolded on screen wasn't just troubling, it was seismic. Footage of Officer Keene doing what so many in Grayson Falls suspected, but no one could ever prove. And at the center of it all stood Ashon Bell, not just a black teen wrongfully accused, but something far more dangerous to the establishment. A meticulous thinker who had prepared for this very moment. Ashon remained seated as people filed out. He didn't move much. He didn't need to. His stillness was his power now, and he understood, finally, that he held more than just evidence. He held leverage. Few knew what had gone into that USB drive. Fewer still understood just how deeply Ashon had prepared. He'd begun documenting long before the arrest, not just because he feared it would happen, but because his father had taught him to expect it. Malcolm Bell hadn't been a famous figure. He wasn't on any billboards or history books. But to Ashon, his late father was a warrior of truth, a civil rights historian who taught at a small HBCU in Atlanta before moving to Grayson Falls to raise his family. Malcolm believed that the most dangerous threat to racism wasn't anger or protest. It was receipts, paper trails, proof, patterns. "Son," he used to say, his deep voice rich with conviction, "if you can show them what they refuse to see, you don't just win the moment, you start shifting the world." Ashon was only 12 when his father died of a sudden stroke, but those words never left him, and in the years that followed, he turned them into action. The body cam, small and easily hidden in the seam of his hoodie, was just the beginning. At 14, after a false stop involving his older brother Isaiah, Ashon began researching digital backups. He learned about cloud encryption. He set up 2-step authentication, mirrored drives, and even a fail-safe Dropbox link connected to a panic upload button on his phone. Every file had a backup. Every video was timestamped, watermarked, and spread across multiple logins. By 16, he wasn't just protecting himself, he was building an archive. Each folder was organized by incident, by officer, by location. He'd started collecting neighborhood surveillance, footage from friends, snippets from old Facebook lives, anything that added another pixel to the portrait he was painting, one of systemic harassment hidden beneath procedural language. And none of it would have seen daylight if not for one woman, Ms. Clarissa Wynn, his school counselor. Miss Wynn had a reputation for being both feared and admired. She walked the Jefferson High School hallways like a general, eyes sharp, voice low, presence undeniable. But few students knew her full story. In the late 1990s, she had marched with protesters against voter suppression in Georgia, chained herself to the steps of the county clerk's office, and organized hunger strikes after the Rodney King verdict. She had scars on her knuckles, and even deeper ones in her memory. She saw something in Ashon, the first day she met him. "You got the mind of a soldier," she once told him, "but the heart of a builder. Don't waste that." When Ashon confided in her about Keene's harassment months ago, she didn't offer pity. She offered infrastructure. She connected him to a quiet network of black educators and former civil rights organizers who had pivoted to digital advocacy. They showed Ashon how to protect his footage, how to timestamp metadata, how to encrypt files so they couldn't be erased or tampered with. She even gave him an old-school laptop that wasn't connected to any district server, so they can't trace a damn thing, she'd said. And it was Miss Wynn who, after hearing about his court date, suggested he not just bring the footage but force the system to see all of it. "They'll try to cut you off," she warned him. "Try to call it irrelevant. They'll say your truth is out of scope, so you better have more than one truth. You better have a tsunami of truths." And he had delivered. Now, as the court prepared to reconvene, Ashon sat with his lawyer in the near-empty room. The attorney, Mr. Callahan, tapped through the files on his laptop with wide eyes and a slight shake of the head. "You cataloged all this yourself," he whispered. Ashon nodded once. "You understand this could change, not just your case, but open an investigation into the department?" "I do," Ashon said. His voice didn't tremble. "That's the point." Callahan leaned back, studying him now with more than just professional interest. There was respect there, possibly awe. "They thought you were just some scared kid," he muttered. Ashon met his gaze. "They always do." The door opened, and the bailiff called for both parties to return to the courtroom. Ashon stood, his spine straight, shoulders square. Behind him, Ms. Wynn had slipped quietly into the gallery. She gave him the subtlest nod, not approval but recognition. As Keene re-entered, he moved slower. His mouth was tight. His hands fidgeted with the pen in his pocket. He glanced once at Ashon, but the boy didn't look back. The judge returned to the bench and cleared his throat. "We will resume proceedings. I will remind both parties that courtroom conduct must remain orderly and relevant to the charges at hand." But Callahan was already rising. "Your Honor, with new evidence reviewed during recess, the defense formally requests an expansion of scope under discovery. We have additional footage not previously submitted that directly contradicts Officer Keene's testimony and provides corroborating evidence of repeated misconduct." The judge raised an eyebrow, annoyed but curious. "And how many recordings are we talking about?" Callahan didn't flinch. 17, covering 3 years, all linked to Officer Keene, all time-stamped and verified. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Keene's jaw dropped slightly, then clenched. But Ashon wasn't looking at him. His eyes were fixed on the judge, watching the man squirm under the weight of exposure. 17? The judge repeated, his voice strained. Callahan nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. And that's just the start." The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the projector flickered to life again. What had begun as a simple hearing over an obstruction charge had now unraveled into a full-blown exposé. But no one in the courtroom, least of all Officer Travis Keene, was prepared for what came next. Ashon sat still as his attorney, Mr. Callahan, connected to the drive linked to Ashon's encrypted online folder. The files weren't on a flash drive anymore. They were in the cloud, uploaded days before the trial into a private folder labeled Keene Pattern Archive. What Callahan pulled up wasn't 1 or 2 more clips. It was an entire digital repository. The title page read, "Witness Files, Keene-Related Incidents, 2017 to Present." Gasps moved like a wave through the courtroom gallery. Ashon Bell, seated directly behind Ashon, pressed a hand to her mouth. Ms. Wynne, arms folded and eyes locked forward, allowed herself the smallest nod. The screen changed. Video 1. Name, Jordan Hines. Age 15. Date, October 9, 2019. The grainy footage began. A teenage boy, smaller than Ashon, lanky, wearing a school hoodie, stood on a street corner, holding a basketball. A patrol car eased up. Keene's voice rang out. "You waiting for someone, boy?" Jordan responded nervously. "Just waiting for my ride." "Mind stepping over here? You look like you're up to something." Jordan was arrested minutes later. The charges? Loitering and disorderly conduct. The footage showed nothing close to disorder. Over the clip, a voiceover played, Jordan, now older, recorded from a recent interview. "I didn't even know my rights. He just looked at me like I was already guilty. My mom had to pay over $400 just to get me out, and the school suspended me, said I was a liability." The room was silent, the weight growing. Video 2. Name, Lyles Thatcher. Age 17. Date, July 21, 2020. This one was sharper, filmed with a cell phone camera, hidden in a jacket. Miles was walking home with earbuds in when Keene stopped him and demanded to know what was in his backpack. Miles refused to open it without cause. Keene took it anyway. This time, the camera angle caught something shocking. Keene unzipped the main pocket, then quickly dropped a small silver object inside. The pause was chilling. Later in the video, Keene's voice could be heard stating, "Found a blade. Dangerous item. He's under arrest." Ashon's lawyer paused the video. "Your Honor," he said, his voice ringing clear, "we believe this moment shows Officer Keene planting evidence." Murmurs exploded. The judge raised a hand for silence, but even he looked visibly shaken. He turned slightly to glance at Keene, whose face had paled. Keene leaned in to whisper to his attorney, his neck rigid, hands clenched into fists. Callahan resumed the footage. Video 3. Name, Tyrone Watts. Age 16. Date, March 4, 2021. This one was different. It didn't begin with a stop. It began with a fight for breath. Tyrone sat on the curb, hands zip-tied behind him, his nose bleeding, his voice cracking. The officer's boots, black, shined and unmistakably Keene's, walked away slowly. Then faintly came the voice. "You say anything about this, I'll make sure your mom loses her job." Tyrone's voice broke. "She cleans for the mayor." "Keene. Exactly. Keep your mouth shut." The footage blurred out. Then came the twist. As the screen faded to black, Ashon's folder shifted to a subdirectory the court hadn't yet noticed. Confidential captures. Audio backup. Inside, one single audio file. No title, no timestamp, just a name. Private Rec K.E. Callahan looked at Ashon. "You sure?" Ashon nodded once. "It's the one I told you about." Callahan double-clicked. Static hissed for a moment. Then Keen's voice emerged. Clear, calm, unaware he was being recorded. You can't keep cleaning this crap up for me, Charles. That voice, Officer Charles Marin, the same man who had just delivered the sealed affidavit.
I've done what I can, Travis, but these kids aren't stupid anymore. They're filming everything.
Then get them before they upload it. Or plant something. Whatever. If one of them gets through, I'm screwed. Marin's voice lowered. You already are. I'm out. There was a pause. Then Keen's voice, harder. If you walk now, I swear I'll bring you down with me. The audio stopped. It didn't need a climax. That was the confession. Keen hadn't just crossed lines. He'd known exactly what he was doing. And he wasn't working alone. He had help. He had silence. He had the system. Until now. Ashon sat perfectly still, but inside him, something long numb cracked open. Not grief, not fear, power. For the first time in his life, he had caught the system in its own trap, and everyone in that room saw it. The judge's face shifted, a twitch at the corner of his mouth. Not a smirk, something colder. Strategic, calculating. All evidence submitted is now under judicial review, he said stiffly. Court is adjourned for the day. The jury is dismissed until further notice. But, Your Honor, Callahan protested. We've just submitted. I said the court is adjourned. The gavel cracked. Callahan turned to Ashon, whispering, he's trying to suppress it. Delay, maybe bury it. I figured he might, Ashon whispered back. That's why I made one more copy. Callahan's eyes widened. Where? Ashon stood slowly, backpack in hand. His voice was low but resolute. I sent it to the local press and a national civil rights group. If this courtroom won't finish it, the world will. But just as they stepped into the hallway, a security guard stepped forward. The judge would like to see Mr. Bell in chambers, alone. Ashon's heartbeat quickened. He looked at Callahan, who started to object, but the guard's hand moved subtly toward his belt. Not to draw a weapon, but to send a message. Not here, not now. Ashon took a breath. I'll go, he said. He walked alone down the quiet corridor, each step heavy. Behind the judge's door, something waited. And Ashon knew it wasn't over. Not even close. The courtroom door swung open, bringing in a rush of fluorescent hallway light. On the other side, Tamara Rhodes moved like a woman on a mission. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't care about protocol. She carried no press badge, just a laptop bag and a quiet fire she'd carried for years. She slipped into a nearby cafe booth and went straight to work. It started with a tweet, a short thread. Breaking body cam shows Grayson Falls cop planting evidence on teens, video here. Attached a 30-second clip from Ashon's hidden folder. Within minutes it appeared on local news websites. Over the next hour, regional and national outlets picked it up. Stories of planted weapons, false arrests, racial profiling. Moments later, social media erupted. By sunset, Ashon's name was trending. Hashtags like Justice for Ashon and Keen Unmasked lit up timelines. Celebrities, some with millions of followers, retweeted, adding their outrage. Civil rights organizations posted statements. Legal groups volunteered to help Ashon pro bono. Back in Grayson Falls, the tension grew palpable. City Hall buzzed beneath escalated phone lines and half-shouted press directives. The mayor, Elaine Rupp, had taken office 6 months ago, promising reform. Now she faced her first major test, a public demand for justice. Inside her office, beneath dripping skylights and behind thick oak doors, she paced with her chief of staff, Derek. If we don't act fast, Derek began. Elaine interrupted, voice low and urgent. I want him suspended by morning. Full investigation. Anything less makes me complicit. Derek nodded, face drawn. I'll draft the notice tonight. Then he paused. But the DA is already briefing his office. He's preparing a motion to seal this case entirely. Elaine's jaw tightened. Sealing a public record? That'll backfire. We need transparency. To contain the narrative, if nothing else. Derek spoke too easily. Elaine stared, realizing her political world was already playing defense, even before the first protest. Meanwhile, at the Bell household, dusk closed in. The family sat quietly in their living room, nursing cold tea. Simone studied Ashon's face, still glowing from the courtroom victory, but lined with exhaustion. He felt like he'd aged a decade in days. Miss Clarissa Wynne paced the floor, her steps sharp like a metronome. You did well, Ashon. All of you, she said. But this fight, it's only beginning. Ashon nodded, though his throat felt thick. They're leaking more. Tamara's thread blew up. Simone reached across the coffee table and held his hand. Every mother in town watches the feed like a hawk. Ashon squeezed her hand back. I know, but there's more there. Clarissa's eyebrows rose. Yes? He inhaled slowly. Passport copy. I uploaded it to Tamara's inbox, so no one can blackmail me. But if they try to question my identity, or arrest me again, they'll have to deal with the world watching. Silence fell. Simone looked at her son, then at the woman who'd guided him, and tears emerged. Courage, she whispered. That night, the city held its breath. A planned vigil outside the courthouse drew hundreds, mostly black, many white, all united in recognition. They stood with candles and signs. Watch the video. Justice, not silence. Time to see the truth. National news crews arrived by morning. Camera crews tripped over each other to get footage of Keen's badge number etched into yellow police tape. Anchor voices droned. In a stunning development, while behind them protesters chanted calm yet fierce refrains. Tamara stood among them, phone pressed against her ear. Yes, they posted the full archive link. I sent it to the ACLU. She ended the call, turned to a reporter. This isn't just one file. It's years of lies. Inside City Hall, the suspension order hit the press like a gavel. Keen was to be off duty, no longer patrolling. An independent task force, composed of community leaders, legal experts, and even civil rights activists, would investigate. For a moment, it felt like redemption. But the DA, Carl Mills, sat smug in his office. He'd held a press conference that morning. We must protect the judicial process. Releasing raw footage, some of it unverified, could impair ongoing proceedings. Therefore, I will file a motion to seal the case and any further documentation. He smiled at reporters. Trust in justice. Families watching at home exchanged worried looks. The backlash came swift. National civil rights groups criticized Mills. Tweets like "silence equals guilt" trended. The local NAACP chapter issued a public statement condemning the sealing motion. Fundraising for Ashon's legal defense skyrocketed, from $5,000 to over $200,000 in under 24 hours. Elaine Rupp faced the squeeze of her life. At a midday press briefing, she said nothing conclusive, no fighting words, just a reiteration of transparency and pledges to support judicial review. Some hailed it as cautious diplomacy, others called it cowardice. Meanwhile, Ashon slept fitfully, his dreams blurred courtroom scenes and protests. He woke before dawn and found Tamara in his kitchen, lights dim, her laptop open. How much did they get? She showed him trending metrics, national recognition, TV interviews booked, an online petition approaching 150,000 signatures. They're calling me? Ashon whispered. A hero. She shook her head. No. You're a catalyst. The breakup of silence. The spark or the fuel. He stared at her, mind racing. As the day shifted north, an unexpected twist emerged. On midday national news, an investigative reporter named Naomi Fields appeared with a new claim. Not only did the archive exist, but there were others. Old tapes and internal records, named Keen Clan, suggested Keen had conspired with at least 2 other officers to manipulate evidence across multiple jurisdictions. Naomi's team had corroborated rumors of false arrests stretching into a neighboring county. Several of those officers had quietly retired or moved, shields intact. That story drew fresh outrage. The wave cresting now threatened to become a tsunami. Back in Grayson Falls, the mayor's office became a war room. Screens flashed reporters, dashboards, legal filings. Elaine and Derek conferred with City Attorney Lauren Chen. If the DA's motion holds, everything goes mute, Lauren warned. We can't legally stop it. But we can leak. We can preempt. We can push for a parallel state-level civil rights investigation. Elaine paused. We do it. Today. Derek nodded, already dialing. That evening, a special town hall meeting was scheduled. Tension pulsed through City Hall like electricity. When it began, the room was packed. Families, civil rights activists, some police supporters, cameras. Elaine took the stage. We are here to listen and act, she began, voice measured. I will not let this city be silenced. At her side, Simmons Bell placed a comforting hand on her son's shoulder. A protester shouted, "Then defy them." In that moment, the meeting transformed from a symbolic gesture into a line in the sand. Despite the momentum, darkness followed. After midnight, the street outside the Bell home was silent, so quiet that when a car screeched up, cameras or people, none registered it until it was too late. Plastic eggs glazed with paint struck the front porch. The door rattled under the weight of thrown soda cans. Someone scrawled "Stop Lying Boy" across Simone's car in black spray paint. Another tag read, Punched your ticket. Slang for sentencing. Ashon woke to the low grate of cans sliding against metal, followed by splashes and laughter drifting from the street. He slipped from his bedroom, finding Simone in the kitchen, wiping red paint from the doorframe with trembling hands. Clarissa arrived after a 911 call, standing behind them as Ashon pulled open the door. They all stared at the vandalism, red and black lines jagged across the walls, a scar across the home's face. Simone closed her eyes and took a shaky breath. They sent a message. Ashon knelt before the door, hand hovering over the fresh symbols. "They're scared," he whispered, voice low but steady. "That means we're close." In the distance, a police siren wailed. Not Keen's precinct. This was community patrol responding. But in that moment, to the bells, it might as well have been a different war. Clarissa's voice cut through. "We need to document this. Photos, statements, we move at dawn." Ashon nodded. "This is no longer about me." His eyes hardened. "It's about all of us." He turned to Simone. "We stay." She looked at him, seeing that resolve, not just from the court, or the press, or protests, but from her son, a black teenager who had sparked a reckoning. She nodded once. They stood together, front porch under harsh street lamp glow, shadows behind them. The house looked battered, but whole. Ashon whispered, almost to himself, "They can't erase this." The camera pulled back, lights on the vandalized letters glowing. In the dark, behind the curtains, someone watched. No one spoke. Only fear. The paint still clung to the Bell home like a bruise that wouldn't fade. Every stroke of hate was scrubbed by Simone's trembling hands and Ashon's quiet resolve, but the scars didn't vanish. They etched deeper into the fabric of the town and the fight itself. The message was loud: silence yourself, or we'll do it for you. But Grayson Falls had underestimated something far more potent than threats. Ashon's truth was no longer confined to courtroom walls or edited transcripts. It had spread fast and unfiltered across the country. And in the days that followed the vandalism, something remarkable began to unfold. In Atlanta, a group of college students gathered in front of the state capitol building, holding signs that read, "We are Ashon, and our justice can't be erased." One of them led chants with a bullhorn, voice cracking but strong, "Say his name." In Oakland, in a neighborhood known more for protest than peace, families marched down International Boulevard with Ashon's photo pinned to their jackets. In Chicago, a youth group recited excerpts from his testimony at a school assembly. In the Bronx, a black-owned bookstore hosted an open mic where poets read verses dedicated to his courage. His name echoed, not because the media told people to care, but because the story had awakened something, a collective wound, a collective fire. Truth screamed louder than lies, but power still held the microphone. Ashon Bell became a symbol, not because he wanted to, but because he had to be. The surge of attention brought celebrities into the fray. Rappers, actors, authors, all tweeted in support. Influencers shared breakdowns of the video footage. One tweet from a Grammy-winning artist read, "This boy exposed the system. He didn't raise his voice. He raised the mirror. Justice for Ashon." Within 48 hours, a well-established civil rights organization, the Justice Arc Collective, reached out. They offered to take over Ashon's legal representation, provide personal protection, and launch a national campaign for law enforcement accountability in his name. Ashon sat quietly in his living room as the call came in. He held the phone to his ear, barely nodding. "I don't want to be famous," he told them. "I just want the truth to be heard." The voice on the other end replied gently, "And it will be, because of you." But while Ashon's name grew louder in the streets, in the court it was still silenced. The courthouse in Grayson Falls had turned into a war zone of legal maneuvering and institutional resistance. The judge, visibly rattled by the growing pressure, refused to expand the case beyond the original charges. Every motion submitted by Ashon's defense, to admit new evidence, to challenge Keen's history, to bring in external oversight, was met with delay tactics. Objections. Extensions. Red tape. The walls of justice were thick, and they were closing in. Worse, Keen had not disappeared. He'd gone quiet for 72 hours. Then he re-emerged, carefully packaged, professionally filmed, and strategically outraged. It began with a local news interview. Keen, dressed in a polo and jeans, stood in front of a fireplace, framed as a family man, a servant of the law. He looked solemn, measured, victimized. "I've spent my life protecting this community," he said, voice steady. "And now, because of edited footage and a coordinated media campaign, I'm being demonized." The interviewer nodded, offering no pushback. "They are using me to make a point," Keen continued, "and it's tearing this town apart. That kid, he lied, he cut clips, took things out of context, and now I'm receiving threats. My kids are scared. My wife won't go outside. The segment aired on every local network. Within hours, sympathetic op-eds popped up on fringe sites. A blog titled "The Real Victim in Grayson Falls" accused Ashon of weaponizing race to escape accountability. Comment sections overflowed with venom. What about the cop's side? Another thug playing the race card. He'll be on a mural by next week. Disgusting. Ashon read the comments late at night, alone, long after his mother had gone to bed. His hands didn't shake. Not anymore. But his chest tightened. Because he knew that no matter how much truth you showed the world, some would still choose blindness. The national attention had also created friction among his supporters. Some activists wanted Ashon to speak at rallies. Others wanted him on camera more, crying, yelling, giving the story a human face. But Ashon resisted. He didn't want to become a prop for politics. Tamara sat with him one evening, her laptop open, her eyes tired. You don't have to carry everything, Ashon. He looked at her. But if I don't, they'll rewrite it. She nodded slowly. You're right, but even truth needs breath. The protest continued. Some turned tense. Police stood at barricades with riot gear. Drones circled above. But there were no riots, no looting, only candles, signs, and the name, Ashon. Then, it happened. In court, during what was meant to be a simple evidentiary review, the defense called up one of the more damning video clips, the one where Keene could be seen warning a young boy to watch his mouth unless he wanted a broken face. Callahan connected the drive, searched the folder, opened the file. Nothing. He tried another folder. The master copy. Gone. Your Honor, he said, panicked. The file has been deleted. The judge frowned. From your own copy. Callahan opened his encrypted cloud. It's gone from here too. Tamara stood in the gallery. She checked her own drive.
Gone.
Ashon's jaw tensed. That's not possible. The courtroom buzzed. Someone tampered with the files, Callahan stated. These were secured, triple backed up. The judge, already eager to regain control of his courtroom, narrowed his eyes. Unless your security wasn't as strong as you believed, counselor. Ashon rose to speak, but Callahan placed a hand on his shoulder. The metadata will prove it was deleted externally. This was an intrusion. But the judge wasn't listening. If the file cannot be presented, it cannot be admitted. Gavel strike. Just like that, one of the most incriminating pieces of evidence, erased from the record. Later that night, Tamara received an anonymous email. The subject line, "You're not as invisible as you think." The body of the email contained a single line. This is bigger than a badge, and deeper than a boy. No attachments, no links, just a quiet reminder. Someone was watching, and they were already inside. The disappearance of the damning video didn't just rattle the courtroom. It cracked open a deeper unease that pulsed beneath the legal walls of Grayson Falls. Whispers moved faster than facts. Accusations hovered like smoke. But one person refused to let the truth slip into silence. Tamara Rhodes sat in her dimly lit apartment, the blue glow of her screen washing over stacks of folders, flash drives, and interview notes. She hadn't slept properly in days. Her inbox was bursting with leads, warnings, and tip-offs, and somewhere, tangled in all of it, was a breadcrumb that refused to be ignored. The judge. Judge Warren M. Tilson. The name hadn't stirred her before. Just another man in a robe. Another cog in a broken system. But the moment he struck the gavel and dismissed the missing file without hesitation, without even requesting a technical audit, something inside Tamara clicked. This wasn't just bias. This was complicity. She began digging. Her first stop was the public docket archives. Tilson's name stretched across more than a decade of rulings. On paper, he had presided over hundreds of cases, mostly criminal, many involving youth. But patterns began to emerge. Of the 32 black minors tried in his courtroom over the past 5 years, 29 had received the maximum allowable sentence. White minors, in contrast, were far more likely to be offered diversion programs or community service. Even when charges mirrored exactly, such as drug possession or disorderly conduct, the outcomes weren't just different, they were damning. She mapped it out in a spreadsheet. Names, charges, sentencing disparities. The picture formed fast. Tilson wasn't just leaning into bias, he was building a system around it. Still, that wasn't enough for the public. Numbers could be twisted, downplayed, denied. She needed proof of intention, something no one could spin. It came from a whisper. An encrypted message, sent from a burner account. No name, no greeting. You're not the only one watching. Tilson's clerk. 2018-2021. Check his private inbox backups. Attached was a zip folder. Tamara froze. Her heartbeat thrummed. She clicked. Inside were over 100 archived emails. Most were routine. Scheduling, docket adjustments, court maintenance. But scattered among them were personal exchanges. Notes between Tilson and his golf buddies. All retired law enforcement. A few to police chiefs. A handful to councilmen. And 3 that chilled her. One was sent during a city council vote on bail reform. These kids already think they run the streets. Give them a handout and they'll think they're kings. Let them sit for a few days, learn some discipline. Another, referencing a case involving a black teen accused of shoplifting. Another hoodie punk crying racism. When they learn to speak English properly, maybe they'll understand how a courtroom works. And the last short scrawled and sent during Ashon's pre-trial days contained a single line. This one's dangerous, too smart for his skin. Tamara's breath caught. She reread the line. Too smart for his skin. Her hands trembled. It was enough, more than enough. The next morning, Tamara published the story on an independent platform she trusted, the Reckoning Dispatch. She uploaded the email screenshots, the sentencing data, the spreadsheet. No edits, no fluff, just the ugly bones of power laid bare. It went viral in hours. Grayson Falls convulsed. Local radio erupted. School classrooms paused as teachers discussed it in hushed tones. Parents whispered about past cases. Was that why Jamal got sent to juvie? At City Hall, Elaine Rupp called an emergency legal ethics review. She wasn't naive. She knew the storm she was stepping into. But she also knew silence would cost her soul. Judge Tilson, however, refused to flinch. He issued a public statement through the court. Selective interpretation of personal correspondence does not constitute disqualification. I stand by my record, and will continue to serve with integrity. He would not step down. He would not recuse. He would not explain. And somehow, by the mechanics of institutional rot, he was still legally protected. Ashon Bell, having watched it all unfold, sat down at her kitchen table later that night. The same table where her husband Malcolm had once explained civil rights history to their sons. The same table where Ashon had studied for math tests, written scholarship essays, and packed away his quiet fears. She pulled out a pen, not her laptop, not her phone, a pen, and wrote a letter. To Judge Warren M. Tilson. You don't know me beyond my son, but I've watched you. I've studied your silence. I've seen the way your eyes skip over black boys like they're static on a screen. I raised my son to believe that truth had a place in this world, that if he was kind, smart, patient, if he kept his head down and worked hard, he would be protected. You shattered that. You took one look at him and decided his intellect was a threat. You saw his dignity and called it defiance. I'm not writing for your conscience. I've stopped believing you have one. I'm writing so that when history records this moment, someone will know a mother begged for her son's humanity to be seen, and you refused. We will not beg again. We will not break. Ashon Bell, she didn't send it through mail. She hand-delivered it to the courthouse and placed it in the drop box marked clerk correspondence. She knew it would get to him. That evening, as Ashon read the story about Tilson's emails aloud at the dinner table, he paused mid-sentence. His voice cracked. He wrote, "Too smart for his skin." Simone reached across and gripped his hand. "You are," she said softly, "and they're terrified." Clarissa Wynne nodded from across the table. "And now they're exposed." The next morning, civil rights lawyers from the Justice Arc Collective filed a formal petition to the U.S. Department of Justice. Their demand was unequivocal. Launch a federal investigation into judicial misconduct and systemic racism in the courts of Grayson Falls. Attached were 49 pages of documentation, case data, email records, sentencing inconsistencies, expert testimony. They sent it with the weight of history. And a closing line that read, "Even the gavel was cracked with bias. Justice had no sanctuary." But somewhere in a downtown office, a pair of unfamiliar eyes scanned those same documents. They weren't from Grayson Falls. They weren't from the DOJ. They were from a private legal firm, discreet, elite, with ties to politicians and police unions. The email was simple. Begin contingency protocols. He cannot testify in open court. The gavel struck once, then again. Court was back in session, but fairness had never truly arrived. Ashon Bell sat quietly at the defense table, spine straight, hands folded. He wasn't just waiting for justice, he was staring it down. The room felt colder than usual, as though even the walls understood what was about to happen. His mother sat behind him, her presence a silent anchor. Tamara and Clarissa flanked the gallery row, like sentinels. This wasn't a trial anymore. It was a battlefield dressed in etiquette. And the prosecution had come to fight dirty. Keene's defense attorney, a sharp-suited man flown in from a major firm, rose with the confidence of someone used to rewriting narratives. His name was Hallstrom, graying temples, soft southern drawl, and a specialty in reputation control. The kind of lawyer who didn't just defend the guilty, he made them sympathetic. Your Honor, Hallstrom began smoothly, it's vital that this court view the complete picture of the young man who stands accused. Ashon didn't move. Hallstrom continued, pacing slowly. We've heard a lot about Mr. Bell's footage. We've seen videos. But what we haven't seen until now is the file that paints a more complex, more troubling portrait. He turned toward the screen. What followed wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. A file titled Ashon Behavioral History opened. It included cherry-picked emails from school administrators flagging Ashon for excessive questioning in class, a note about interrupting authority figures, and a heavily exaggerated report from a substitute teacher who claimed Ashon challenged her lesson and disrupted the classroom. Hallstrom read each item slowly, letting the implications drip. He was flagged for inappropriate conduct during debate club. He had an unexcused absence, 3 times in sophomore year. A janitor once reported him loitering after hours, in the science building alone. None of the claims amounted to anything criminal. None had even led to suspension. But the point wasn't proof. It was erosion of trust, of character, of identity. They were building a shadow, hoping it would blot out the light. Hallstrom delivered his closing jab with a smug smile. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't a saint on trial. This is a young man with a pattern of disrespect for order. Ashon remained still. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. His lawyer, Mr. Callahan, leaned in. Do you want me to object? Ashon whispered, no. Let them speak. The truth doesn't fear lies. Then something unexpected happened. The court clerk announced the defense's next witness. Clarissa Wynne rose from her seat. The courtroom stilled. Even Hallstrom turned, eyebrows arched slightly. Clarissa walked to the stand with purpose, her blazer sharp, her eyes unshaken. When she took her oath, her voice was clear, not loud, but undeniable. I've been a counselor at Jefferson High for 12 years. Before that, I was a civil rights organizer for 16. Callahan approached gently. Miss Wynne, are you familiar with the school file the prosecution just presented? She nodded. I am. And I helped write half of it. Gasps stirred. And what do you say about its content? Clarissa looked straight ahead. It's selective, stripped of context, and manipulated to sound like a threat. Explain. Disrupting class means Ashon asked why the Civil War was still being taught as a conflict over economics. Loitering means he stayed behind to help clean after debate meets. Unexcused absence? He was at a scholarship interview. I signed the permission slip myself, but the secretary never logged it. Callahan let her words land. And what would you say about Ashon Bell's character? Clarissa leaned forward, every word landing like stone. He's principled, brave, overprepared because he's had to be. He has walked a tightrope his whole life between brilliance and survival. And the system you see here today has tried everything to shove him off. A long pause followed. Then she turned toward the judge. And I've worked with hundreds of students, but I've only seen one who built a digital archive to expose corruption. That's Ashon, and that is what scares them. Silence held for a breath too long. Then the judge cleared his throat. Thank you, Ms. Wynne. That will be all. Clarissa stepped down, locking eyes with Ashon as she passed. He gave her the faintest nod. Behind him, Simone gripped her seat tighter. A tear traced her cheek, but she wiped it quickly, refusing to let grief steal from pride. As court prepared to break for lunch, the gallery rustled with quiet tension. Even the jury seemed shaken, whispering as they left. Ashon stood, stretching slightly, trying to stay loose. His attorney leaned over. They'll come at you harder after this. Ashon whispered, let them. That's when it happened. A man in plain clothes stood near the back exit, someone no one had noticed before. He wore a dark baseball cap, pulled low, and a tan jacket zipped to the neck. Tamara spotted him first. He raised one hand slowly. I have something the court needs to hear. A bailiff stepped forward. Sir, this is not... But the man removed his cap. Gasps. It was Officer Raymond Deeks, a former Grayson Falls officer, who had quietly resigned last year under personal health reasons. I was Keene's partner in 2020. I have records, audio, emails. He looked directly at the judge. And I'm willing to testify under oath. Gasps rippled through the courtroom like the sudden hush before a storm. All eyes turned to the man standing at the back. Officer Raymond Deeks, once Keen's partner, now cloaked in plain clothes and tension. He walked slowly, deliberately past the gallery, past the bailiff who hesitated just long enough for Deeks to reach the front. The judge adjusted his glasses, visibly uncomfortable. This man is not on the witness list. Callahan stood instantly. Your Honor, given the gravity of his claim and the material evidence he says he holds, I move to allow Officer Deeks to testify under oath immediately. Keen shifted in his seat, jaw tight, eyes narrowing. His attorney leaned in quickly, whispering something sharp. But Keen didn't nod. He didn't blink. He simply stared at Deeks like a man watching his own roof catch fire. The judge hesitated. The room hung in silence. Every breath stalled. Very well, he said at last. If Mr. Deeks will be sworn in, he may proceed. But if this is a stunt, there will be consequences. A clerk brought out the Bible. Deeks placed a hand on it, voice calm. I swear to tell the truth. And for the first time in that courtroom, the truth arrived with teeth. Raymond Deeks took the stand and immediately pulled out a flash drive from his coat pocket. This contains over 170 files, he said. Emails, radio logs, internal memos. Files about what? Callahan asked. Racial targeting patterns used in patrol scheduling and discretionary stops. Keen referred to them as route traps, targeted zones mapped to maximize interactions with black teens. There were audible gasps from the jury box. Deeks leaned forward. We used codes. 909s for East Sector teens, J codes for just walking kids. These weren't official codes, they were internal, passed between certain officers. We were told they kept the streets preemptively clean. Tamara's jaw tightened. In the gallery, Clarissa Wynn's eyes welled, not with surprise but validation. What else is in those files? Callahan asked, his voice steady but urgent. Time-stamped radio exchanges showing Keen requesting backup for 909s in zones where no crimes had been reported. Notes from shift captains thanking us for high engagement stats, which meant more arrests regardless of cause. There's even a list. Keen called it his pattern watch. Names of teens, mostly black, he kept tabs on. Callahan turned to the judge. Your Honor, this constitutes evidence of systemic profiling and should nullify all credibility of Officer Keen's previous testimony. The judge didn't speak. But the courtroom had changed. No longer stoic, no longer dismissive. Even the jury's posture had shifted forward-leaning, alert, eyes on Keen like he might suddenly disappear. Keen's mask began to crack. His fingers, once confidently crossed in front of him, now twitched. His mouth, once a smug line, quivered at the edges. Hallstrom leaned over again, trying to contain him. Keen shrugged him off. He rose slowly and asked to be excused to the hallway. The judge allowed it without looking up. Simone Bell leaned toward her son and whispered, He knows. Ashon nodded, that the truth doesn't wait anymore. Outside the courtroom doors, Keen's footsteps echoed too loudly. He moved quickly, breathing fast, eyes darting like a cornered animal. A reporter tried to stop him in the hall, mic raised, but he shoved past. Inside, Deeks continued. There's one more thing, he said. A voice memo. Keen recorded it himself, bragging. It's short, but it's the nail. He played it. Keen's voice filled the room, cocky and unfiltered. If you scare 'em just enough, they shut up, they always do. Long as no one's filming, it's fair game. The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved. Because there it was, uncut, undeniable. The truth had teeth now, and it tore through the lies. Judge Tilson finally spoke, his voice strained. This court will recess for 30 minutes to deliberate the admissibility of these new materials. Gavel. The courtroom exhaled all at once. Ashon remained seated, calm, focused. He turned to his lawyer. He's not coming back, is he? Callahan gave him a look. I don't think he is. Down the hall, Keen moved faster now, past security, past the court clerks, toward the rear exit. A deputy spotted him. Officer Keen, you're not cleared to leave. Keen didn't respond. He shoved the door open. Outside, sunlight poured across the courthouse steps, a line of media vans parked across the street. He squinted into the light, looked both ways, then bolted. He didn't run fast, but he ran like a man who finally knew. The badge wouldn't save him. Not anymore. Keen didn't make it far. Less than 4 blocks from the courthouse, a cluster of protesters spotted him darting into an alley behind a shuttered grocery store. He tried to blend in, pulled his cap low, kept his head down, but it was too late. His name, his face, had become too familiar. Someone recognized him. Then someone shouted.
Hey, that's him. That's the cop.
Phones rose like weapons. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Keen froze under the weight of their lenses. He'd worn a badge for over a decade, but never had he felt so naked, so unshielded. He didn't run again. He just stopped. Hands raised halfway in defeat, he muttered, "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Minutes later, 2 deputies arrived and escorted him back, this time not through the front doors of the courthouse, but a side entrance where shame could slip in quietly. The news broke before the courtroom lights could flicker back on. Breaking Officer Travis Keene apprehended after attempting to flee courthouse. That was only the first headline. Within hours, the floodgates opened. Whistleblower Raymond Deeks handed off the rest of the files to multiple independent news outlets, and what they uncovered didn't just implicate Keene, it dismantled him. Footage emerged. Not courtroom tapes, not Ashon's files. Old videos. Grainy, archived, buried deep in online platforms long since forgotten. Clips from 2015 and 2016. Low-resolution cell phone captures from bystanders who'd tried to upload them back then, only to be ignored or shadow banned. In one, Keene could be seen shoving a teen against a brick wall, cursing under his breath. In another, he told a group of black middle schoolers, "Y'all better stay in line, or we'll make an example." Then came the most haunting one, a nighttime stop. A young man face down on the sidewalk, Keene leaning over him, whispering, "Say another word, and I'll make you disappear." The boy whimpered, "Please." The footage ended, but the impact didn't. Victims began to emerge. One by one, names once buried under misdemeanor charges and school suspensions came forward. Some were now in their 20s, some still teenagers, all of them carrying the same scar, not physical but social, psychological, a fracture in how they saw themselves in the world. 17 individuals filed lawsuits in the span of a week. Charges included unlawful arrest, coercion, intimidation, and civil rights violations. Some of the claims went beyond Keene, touching precinct leadership, supervisory negligence, and policy failures. Grayson Falls Police Department went silent. Then, they scrambled. Internal reviews were launched, external audits called, press conferences were canceled, a formal statement was issued. "The actions and conduct of Officer Keene do not represent the values of our department. We are committed to full cooperation with the investigation and to rebuilding trust with the community." But the community wasn't interested in promises. They wanted accountability. Inside the department, things began to shift. Officers who once stood shoulder to shoulder with Keene began distancing themselves. Old photos disappeared from station walls. His name was removed from internal rosters. Awards he'd once bragged about were stripped from the department website. One officer even returned his commendation, placing it on the chief's desk with a note that read, "If this is what it stood for, I want no part of it." The so-called blue wall, that unofficial brotherhood of silence, showed its first real cracks. It wasn't falling, but it was bleeding. Ashon sat in his room, knees tucked to his chest, watching the news unfold. The glow from his laptop flickered over his face, calm but distant. He read the headlines in silence. Multiple victims break silence after Keene exposed. Former officer accused of pattern of racial targeting. Whistleblowers' files spark statewide review of police conduct. His phone buzzed. Dozens of messages, some from friends, some from strangers, all thanking him. But Ashon didn't feel victorious. He felt hollow. Like something sacred had broken, not just in him, but in the system itself. A system that let this happen, that let it last. Simone entered quietly, sat beside him on the bed. For a while neither of them spoke. Then she whispered, "You pulled a mask off a monster." He nodded. "Barely. But you know what scares me," she said. He looked at her. "That it took you a child to do it." The next day, the courthouse swelled with tension. Word had spread that the jury was ready. No one had expected it so soon. Inside the courtroom, Ashon sat at the defense table, Clarissa to his right, Callahan on his left. Tamara scribbled notes in the gallery. Simone gripped a silver cross necklace between her fingers. The courtroom was silent but pulsing, as though every breath was waiting for permission. The jury entered. 12 faces, unreadable. The foreperson rose. The judge adjusted his robe. "All rise." Ashon stood, steady. His hands didn't shake, but something inside him did. Because no matter how much evidence had been shown, how many voices had emerged, how many truths had screamed, this system still held the mic. The judge nodded to the foreperson. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The room went still. Yes, Your Honor. The bailiff stepped forward to receive the slip of paper. He walked it to the judge. The judge read it silently, then looked up and opened his mouth. The judge held the paper for a beat too long. Not long enough to be illegal, but long enough for everyone to feel the weight of the moment. Every eye in the room strained toward the bench. The courtroom, once a place where voices echoed in search of fairness, now held nothing but breath. Ashon Bell didn't blink. His hands were clasped in his lap, not in prayer but in stillness, a stillness that had cost him so much to maintain. Judge Tilson looked up. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis Keene, guilty on all counts. The words struck not like thunder, but like a distant crack, the kind that signals something ancient splitting, something long held together by silence and fear, finally giving way. A ripple passed through the gallery, too restrained to be a cheer, too stunned to be a gasp, just movement, a surge of breath and disbelief. Ashon turned slowly to his right. His mother stood behind him, her hands pressed to her mouth. Clarissa gripped the edge of the bench, her eyes shimmering. Tamara, silent, lowered her head. But Simone moved first. She crossed the distance between gallery and defense table, like the world might collapse if she didn't touch her son. She didn't say anything when she reached him. She just wrapped her arms around him and held on like she'd never let go again. Keene didn't move. The verdict struck him not with shock, but with exposure, as if the shield he'd worn for years had finally shattered and left him vulnerable for the world to see. He looked around, but there was nowhere left to hide, not behind his badge, not behind the uniform, and certainly not behind the courthouse that had once served as his playground. His attorney placed a hand on his arm. Keene shrugged it off. There was no more defense. The gavel fell. This court is adjourned for sentencing. But the moment had already outgrown the courtroom. Before Ashon could gather his thoughts, before Keene could be escorted out, the world outside the courthouse had already erupted. Breaking news. Grayson Falls officer Travis Keene found guilty. Ashon Bell acquitted. Jury sides with teen in nationally watched case. Video evidence leads to indictment in landmark civil rights trials. Cable news anchors scrambled to update live headlines. Social media feeds swelled with posts. The footage of Ashon standing still, unbroken, as the verdict was read was clipped, shared, and captioned. He didn't cheer. He didn't scream. He stood like truth in human form. Within hours, protesters in New York, Atlanta, Oakland, and D.C. raised signs bearing Ashon's name. Ashon Bell, the boy who brought the system to trial. His name wasn't just said, it was chanted. The courtroom's walls, once thick with denial, now buzzed with the buzz of shifting tides. But the fight wasn't finished. The very next morning, the Bar Association of the state announced a formal ethics investigation into Judge Tilson. Tamara had already submitted all the incriminating emails, the racial slurs, the rulings disproportionate and cruel. Civil rights groups demanded his resignation. Protesters outside the courthouse painted "Justice needs a new gavel" on the street in chalk letters 3 feet tall. Inside the Judicial Review Committee's chambers, arguments swirled. Will this set a precedent? One member asked. Good, another answered. Let it. At the Bell home, everything felt surreal. Ashon stared at the front door, still marked faintly from the vandalism weeks ago. But the threats felt smaller now. Not gone, but smaller. Behind that door the world had shifted. And so had he. Simone cooked breakfast with extra care. Grits, bacon, toasted bread she hadn't made in months. You need something warm, she said, her voice still cracked from all the weeping. Clarissa sat by the window, phone blowing up with messages from educators, scholars, and former students. You made history, one read. Another simply said, I see the world different now. Ashon read them all, but said little. Until the knock came at the door. Tamara. She didn't speak, just handed him an envelope, thick and official, bearing the golden seal of the United States House of Representatives. He opened it slowly. Inside was a formal invitation.
Mr. Ashon Bell.
You are hereby invited to testify before the United States Congress during a hearing on civil rights violations and law enforcement. Simone gasped. Clarissa blinked twice, then whispered, Baby. But Ashon just stood there, shoulders straight. I'm going, he said. The headlines hit again. Teen behind landmark trial to speak before Congress. Ashon Bell heads to D.C., will testify on police misconduct. But with attention came new threats. That evening, an anonymous call was logged at City Hall. A low voice, male, southern drawl. If that boy gets up there and talks, he won't come back. No name, no traceable number, Just a recording that sent chills down the mayor's back. Tamara received a copy of the threat the next morning. She didn't hesitate. She called in every contact she had in security. "We go with him," she said, "no matter what." Ashon didn't react when she told him. He simply nodded. They can't scare truth back into a box. On the night before his trip to Washington, Ashon walked the old route home, the same path he took the night Keene stopped him. He passed the corner store, the stop sign, the flickering streetlight that never got fixed. Everything looked the same. But he didn't. In the darkness, he whispered, "This street didn't break me." A small voice behind him replied, "It tried." Simone had followed him. "You ready?" she asked. "I've been ready." She smiled faintly. Not everyone's ready to listen, but they're watching now. The next morning, Ashon stood in a gray suit, blue tie, in front of a line of microphones in D.C. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Protesters cheered behind barricades. He walked past them all. Into the Capitol building. Into history. For once, the gavel struck justice. As Ashon walks through security, an aide whispers in his ear, "We just got word someone inside the committee is trying to suppress your testimony." Ashon stops mid-step and smiles. They'll have to try harder. The morning light slanted through the dorm room window, painting soft rectangles on the worn carpet. Ashon Bell lay on his bed, school bag at his feet, staring at the ceiling as if it held the world's expectations. Freshman orientation would start in an hour. He'd chosen this college, a state university with a strong social justice program, specifically because of the scholarship funded by the Justice Arc Collective. But even as the opportunity gleamed, the quiet ache in his chest persisted. He pushed himself upright and walked to the window. Below, students rushed across the quad, coffee in one hand, phones in the other, their faces full of hope and nerves. Ashon let himself feel it too. Hope, and something heavier, responsibility. Downstairs, he found Simone in the common area, clasping a chipped mug of tea. Her eyes glistened, proud but pointed. "You look like someone about to change the world," she said. He offered a wan smile. "Or someone about to try." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've already done more than most of us ever will." Later that day, Ashon stepped into his first class, Race, Policy, and Society. The lecture hall was massive, nearly 200 students seated in rising rows. He picked a middle seat, quiet among chatter. The professor, a black woman with silver dreadlocks and a presence like thunder, scanned the room. When she reached Ashon, she paused. A gentle recognition was that. She nodded at him as light came to her eyes. He nodded back. "Welcome, Mr. Bell," she said, voice resonant. "We've been waiting for you." A silence fell. He realized the students had stopped talking. Some were leaning in, others glancing at their phones. He felt the weight of expectation and pressed his notebooks to his chest. Then he sat. The days blended into a rhythm of classes, study groups, and speeches. By midweek, Ashon was invited to speak at a campus rally. The room was packed, students, professors, city activists. He looked out over the crowd. They looked back, not at the boy from Grayson Falls, but at the man who had stood in a courtroom and refused to disappear. His speech was simple, but it struck like a hammer. "I walked into court a suspect," he said, voice steady. "They saw skin. They saw fear. But I walked out a symbol, not because I wanted to be, but because truth forced me into that space. And now it's my turn, not to ask for justice, but to build it." Afterward, the crowd surged forward with applause. Students asked for photos. Professors shook his hand. One kid, dark and small, said, "You gave me courage I didn't know I had." Ashon left the campus center that afternoon with his voice hoarse but his heart lighter. He was doing what he'd trained himself to do, turn his pain into purpose. Night brought dreams of flashing lights and a patrol car behind him. He woke abruptly, soaked in sweat. It was always the same moment, Keene lifting his backpack, the hooded lens capturing everything. But now he pulled himself out. He rose, pulled on sweatpants, and walked outside the dorm's back door. He stood under a sky full of scattered clouds, memory vivid in every pulse. He whispered, "I survived." Under that moonlight, hurt lingered, but so did determination. Scars didn't vanish. They became lines on a map of survival. Over the next weeks, Ashon's voice went beyond campus walls. The civil rights group funded his travel to Detroit, Philadelphia, Phoenix, where he spoke at high schools and community forums. Each time he carried the same message. When the system tries to silence you, speak louder, find community, build evidence, hold your own space. In one auditorium, a student asked, "Weren't you afraid?" Ashon paused, then said, "Yes, every day. But fear is not a stop sign. It's a signal that you matter." He met people whose parents had marched with his father, teens who filmed stop and frisks on their phones, community organizers who used his court footage as curriculum in youth workshops. In Detroit, a history teacher told him, "We teach your case now. We teach it like we taught Brown v. Spord." In Phoenix, he held the hand of a mother whose son had been harassed by police, the same keen method, and watched her sob as she said, "He didn't have your courage." Each time, a part of Ashon cracked open, a part he hadn't even known existed: empathy, collective pain, collective healing. But even as he gave voice to others, his own wounds pulsed. There were nights he couldn't sleep, late-night calls with Clarissa. "I'm tired, Ms. Wynne," or with Tamara. What if they start deleting again? His fears were never about jail anymore. They were about being erased again. In therapy sessions arranged by the legal group, he learned the language of trauma, not just legal outcomes. He learned that not every cry needed to be strong, that tears weren't weakness. But every time he shed them, he became more honest with himself and with others. One evening, Ashon returned to his dorm room after a media interview in Chicago. He collapsed onto his mattress and stared at the ceiling again. The room was littered with flyers from campus events and headlines taped to the wall. But tonight, it wasn't inspiration. It felt like a cage. He grabbed his phone and called Simone. She answered immediately. "You okay?" He paused. "I'm just tired, Mom." She let him stay quiet for a moment. "I know." Then she said gently but firmly, "Remember, he can't touch your story. You told it first." He exhaled into the phone. "I know. It's just, sometimes I can't outrun the fear." Simone answered truthfully, "None of us can, but you don't have to outrun, it's part of the path." He drifted to sleep with her voice in his ear. The next morning, a campus-wide email alert appeared. Breaking suspension of protection order against Travis Keene temporarily lifted pending appeal. Ashon felt his heart crush. His name echoed again. Keene's appeal trial loomed. With a different judge presiding, one rumored to have conservative leanings and ties to police unions. His chest tightened. The system he had struck once hadn't surrendered. It circled back with new armor. That afternoon, he walked across campus under a gray sky. Students passed by, whispers following him. A few offered smiles, others stared, uneasy. He carried himself straight, but his shoulders sagged slightly. Tamara appeared beside him. "The appeal trial is set in 2 weeks, she said softly, "in Grayson Falls." Ashon nodded. "They're bringing in a new biased judge." He closed his eyes for a second. "I knew this wouldn't end after one trial." Tamara put a hand on his arm. "But you're not the same boy who walked into that first courthouse." He swallowed hard. "No, I'm a vanguard now." That night, at a student-led vigil near the statue of Frederick Douglass, Ashon spoke again. Under candlelight, he faced those who had come to support him. He told them about fear, justice, purpose, about how justice is a moment, but truth is a movement. "Some want to welcome me as a hero," he said, voice soft yet clear, "but I'm just a young man who refused to be erased. I'm no hero, I'm proof. When you gather the evidence, when you trust the system to break, you don't get swallowed. You create a space for others to walk through." The candles flickered in agreement. Back in his dorm room later, he stared at his reflection in the mirror. He touched his tie, still straight, still part of the suit he wore for congressional hearings, campus events, rallies. He saw a boy who had walked into court a suspect, and walked out a symbol. He saw someone who had become the voice for thousands. But he also saw someone whose scars still ached, whose nights still had nightmares, who was still learning how to be both strong and vulnerable. He whispered to himself, "This is not victory, not yet." In the days that followed, phone calls came daily, speaking invitations, interviews, keynote requests. At every turn, he brought up Keene's appeal. He said, in one interview, "What I won't let happen is for this to become a side story in someone else's narrative. The system tried to silence me once, and now if they do it again, it won't be just about me. It'll be about the hundreds they want to erase next." His words were carried on national podcasts, Yoruba radio programs, student papers, and faith leaders' sermons. Ashon's voice had become oxygen. But under it all, unease simmered. He could feel the energy shift when the appeal date drew closer. He recognized it from the first trial, the way institutions held their breath before demanding silence. He'd seen it before, the pull to minimize, to overshadow, to replay the first narrative with stronger lines of forgetting. Yet this time, he had more than evidence. He had a movement, A network. A mother whose courage refused to bend. A mother whose voice had already written letters and confronted judges. He had allies, now in every city and organization that believed accountability couldn't be postponed. He had become more than a boy with evidence. He was a vanguard. He walked into court a suspect, and walked out a symbol. As Keene's appeal trial draws near with a judge rumored to favor established authority, Ashon files a last-minute motion for a shift to federal court and drops a file labeled New Evidence Pending into his public folder. On the first day of the appeal, the courtroom doors opened to reveal something unexpected, something else that could change everything yet again. Days blurred into months, college routines, interviews, legal prep, and travel. But Ashon Bell carried a singular truth: justice isn't a destination, it's an ongoing journey. As the fall semester matured, he shifted his focus from courtroom battles to community building, laying the foundation for work that would outlast any single verdict. Inside a college conference room, aflame with possibility, Ashon sat at the head of a round table. It was the first meeting of the Youth Justice Collective, a group he founded to mentor teens in activist tactics and civic awareness. They ranged from high school sophomores to freshmen at HBCUs. Some arrived with anger, others with hope. All arrived needing guidance, needing direction. Ashon began softly. "You know, every time I felt silent, somebody else picked up the volume. That's what this is about. Not just finding your voice, but giving it a reason to be heard." The room leaned forward. They talked about documenting abuses, how to back up footage, redact names, archive metadata. They drafted letters to local officials. They practiced speaking in front of cameras. They exchanged tactics, how to respond when a cop questions you, how to de-escalate legally hostile encounters. Ashon didn't say he had all the answers. He said, "We'll figure them together." On weekends, he traveled back to Grayson Falls, not by demand of lawyers, but choice. He held sessions at the Bell family's church, teaching teens their rights, coaching them to articulate injustice calmly and clearly. At one gathering, a 16-year-old named Mia recounted her own stop and search. Her voice quivered, woven with shame and fear. Ashon listened. When she finished, he thanked her for her courage. Then he handed her a card and said, "Keep it. Use it when you need it. You deserve a voice and protection." Her eyes glistened, not just with relief, but with something deeper: belief. At the university, Ashon enrolled in a class on grassroots policy design. He teamed with 2 journalism students to launch a campus-wide newsletter dedicated to racial justice and police transparency. Their first edition featured a breakdown of Keene's appeal trial status, interviews with victims from Grayson Falls, keeping identities anonymous but voices whole, a piece by Simone on healing after trauma, a personal reflection by Ashon titled, "Why Justice Doesn't Sleep." The newsletter went digital and hard copy. The campus buzzed. Student leaders wanted to coordinate with the Youth Justice Collective. Professors invited Ashon to guest speak in classes. Even local media picked it up. A campus convocation invited him to deliver the keynote. On a crisp November afternoon, the auditorium filled with students, faculty, and community members, Ashon walked to the podium. He looked out into the crowd, at mothers, at students clutching signs, at his mother quietly watching. He spoke. Justice was never meant to be a moment. It was meant to be movement. One verdict can free a teenager, but millions of teenagers need systems that don't criminalize them for simply being. We have to build that, together. He described how his scars were reminders of nights lying awake, of betrayal, of systemic patterns. Yet those scars also became pathways, guiding others away from erasure. He ended his speech with a line that echoed on and off stage. Ashon's truth burned through one system, but the fire must keep burning. Meanwhile, as the new year approached, Tamara Rhodes was finishing her labor of love, a documentary titled Lens of Truth, The Bell Case. She had spent weeks editing courtroom footage, adding interviews from Keene's victims, and weaving in verite scenes of Ashon mentoring teens, meeting with lawmakers, and teaching his peers. When the film premiered at a social justice film festival with Ashon, Simone, and Clarissa attending, the reception transcended applause. It opened discussions on restorative justice, policy reform, and community-based accountability. Invitations followed: regional festivals, educational screenings, even code submissions for awards. Tamara's documentary had become more than documentation. It became curriculum. When it won the National Documentary Award for Civil Rights, weeks later in New York, Tamara wept. She accepted the trophy, whispered, "This is for every voice that needed a mic." Across the audience, students and activists cheered. Ashon watched from the crowd, pride and gratitude reflected in every frame. But even as the journey unfolded, The scars remained. Late-night anxiety was no stranger now. Sometimes panic clenched Ashon's chest. There were moments of anger that surprised him, triggered by unfamiliar noise or uniformed strangers. Therapy remained ongoing. Simone walked him through healing rituals, writing, meditation, art. He took up sketching, suddenly drawn to portraits of older civil rights leaders, their lines etched with conflict and resolution. One afternoon, as he sketched Malcolm X, his father's idol, he wrote next to it, "This fight's mine." A tear fell onto the paper. In Grayson Falls, the Youth Justice Collective picked up momentum. Local volunteers, lawyers, social workers, teachers, joined monthly sessions. A local church donated rooms. Tech-savvy students offered to build encrypted video apps. In a local school board meeting, Ashon stood with mothers explaining why their children needed better education and fewer criminalized interactions. He didn't ask for applause. He simply said, "A child's mistake doesn't need a jail cell. It needs support." The board nodded. The policy discussion began. Across town lines, stories similar to Ashon's pulsed under different names. New footage leaked from a neighboring county. A black teenage girl's testimony went viral. Her stop recorded, edited by the officer, but then leaked by her. Her town erupted. They needed tools. What Ashon had built. They reached out to Tamara and the collective. Ashon received a direct message. "Could you help? They just took my footage offline." He felt the urgency. The movement was no longer centered on him. It had spread. The fight wasn't about vindication anymore. It was about prevention, systemically, nationally, personally. Then came the notice. Keene's appeal trial was scheduled for a court with a judge rumored to hold conservative views and close ties to police unions. Callahan called Ashon. "We need to prepare. He's trying to bring it all back into the walls of local courts, local biases." Ashon swallowed hard. "I'll need everyone, our partners in other towns, the collective, the national groups present at the hearing. We can't let them tuck us back in." Callahan nodded, already on it. On the eve of the appeal trial, an email landed in Ashon's inbox. New evidence pending. It came from a secure server set up by Raymond Deeks, the whistleblower. It included a GPS tracking log, showing Keene entered a restricted school zone at night months ago. Dashcam footage of Keene having coffee with a known cop violations lawyer, and an audio file, Keene joking about keeping kids silent with paperwork if cameras failed. The message ended. They thought the new judge would be their safe harbor. Let's test that. Ashon felt a surge of adrenaline. The next morning, Ashon gathered with Clarissa, Tamara, Callahan, and Simone in the Bell living room. Simone held fresh coffee. Clarissa spread documents on the table. Tamara set up a laptop. Ashon looked around at each face. Support, love, resilience. He took a breath. This isn't just my appeal. It's our message to every court that thinks they can bury the truth. We're bringing new evidence to a biased judge, not to fight again but to finish this. Callahan nodded. Let's file for a pretrial motion now. Request the hearing public. Request a transcript. Request cameras. Tamara added, I'll be there filming with a crew. We're building a sovereign record. Simone squeezed Ashon's shoulder. Go show them the fire. Ashon nodded. We burn there again. Ashon's truth burned through one system, but the fire must keep burning. On the first day of the appeal trial, the courtroom doors open, and standing at the back is not just a press contingent, but a familiar face, the young girl from the neighboring county, clutching a file labeled her own case. She locks eyes with Ashon and raises her hand. I have evidence too. Their movement just found its next voice. The fight continues. If this story moved you, if Ashon's courage lit even a small fire in your heart, then help us keep that fire alive. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful true stories that challenge injustice and uplift unheard voices. Like this video if you believe truth deserves a platform. And share it, not for clicks, but because someone out there still feels silenced. Let's make sure they know they're not alone. This isn't just content, this is a movement, and you are part of it.